So, good evening. Our work session for August 19th will come to order. Will you please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? Flag, move the flag. I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
In the last day or so, we have tragically lost one of our students. I'd like to reserve or observe a moment of silence for tonight. Thank you. Okay, moving on with our session, we have roll call, Tiffany.
Yes.
Okay. And I think we'll start with presentations, and I'll turn it over to our superintendent, Dr. Barbary.
Yes, thank you. We are going to first start this evening with a discussion and presentation. Tony Cardamone and Christina Morgan are going to work through the science of reading overview, and then I'm sure we'll chime in as needed. And you can just do that from there.
Yeah, so if it's okay with the board, I'd like to just showcase the timeline of the standards and assessments first, just to get you acclimated, because this was a request from someone on the board, I think it was Christy, who just wanted to know where we were in the transition before we get into the science of reading, because some of the things that Tony will talk about will play into these transitions. So you have this document in front of you. So if you, so we'll just go through this. We are on track for all of these, but you'll focus on 2024, and you can see that nothing's happening in the arts. That was fully implemented back in 2021. And the computer science and digital fluency standards are something that we've been working on for the last couple of years, integrating those across the PK-12 content. And don't think of it as kids sitting on computers when we're talking about computer science and digital fluency. So for example, in pre-K, K, first grade, even in second grade, kids are working on patterning. So that the ability to identify patterns is a foundational skill for coding as students get higher and higher in the grade levels. So those are not necessarily kids sitting on computers when you look at those types of standards. The ELA pre-K through 8, obviously, those are all in place as of last year. For high school, this coming September 2024, grade 10 is transitioning to the next gen ELA standards. Grade 11 will be September 2025, and those students will be taking the first Regents exam that is aligned to those new standards. So those two kids in ELA have been getting each year updated instruction. The math pre-K through 8, similar to ELA, those were fully implemented as in 2023. The math high school, you'll see where we are for our students took the Algebra 1 Regents exams, and right now everything looks pretty good. Our students did very well on those. And then in September, this coming September, you'll see that geometry is up next for students, getting new instruction aligned to those standards. The PE standards, those were full implementation as of last year. The PA for science, you can see that this year our students took the grade 5 and grade 8 science exams that were aligned to the new standards. In high school, this coming September, you'll notice that there will be a name change for biology. Living environment will go back to biology. And earth science will be earth and space sciences. Yes. Oh, you're gonna move that. I'm sorry. So, let's see, social studies, for PK-12, it's been in place for a while. And then world languages is the last. So we do not have world languages in 7th grade. So we are starting our alignment this September. So this coming September, in a couple of weeks, all of our 8th grade languages need to be aligned to the new standards for world languages. We've been working on that for 3 years, getting ready for that. Teachers have been preparing. So, and then each successive year, we will add on that curriculum, even though the teachers are encouraged, 9th grade, 10th grade, 11th grade, they're all encouraged, and they have been implementing some new strategies and new curriculum to prepare for that. So that's, in a nutshell, where we are with the transition to new standards. So if you have any specific questions about that, we'd be happy to answer them. Otherwise, we'll have Tony and Christina move into the science of reading.
Thank you, that was really helpful, thank you.
You're welcome.
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
These new standards, these are all based upon the new graduation requirements and diplomas and stuff that are going to be coming up also, or?
So the standards, I think, are under review, and if there are going to be any changes, I don't believe that they're going to be significant changes based on what the board is, if the board accepts the Blue Ribbon Commission recommendations. They said they would go back and review some of the curriculum, but there isn't really going to be anything, I don't believe, that will be a major change. Most of this is brand new standards that they've been working on and have just recently rolled out, so I don't see them changing anything dramatically as a result of the new graduation requirements.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And the board is the Board of Regents of New York State.
Board of
Not
Regents
this
of New
board.
York State, yes, sorry.
Just point of clarification.
You got it.
Don't like it.
So, first off, I want to thank you for asking us to come to talk about the science of reading. It's been out there, there's a lot of publicity about it, but I also know, talking to leaders across the state, you're one of the few school boards who asked about it, so I'm really excited to know that you have that interest. So, what is the science of reading? It's really based on decades of research. So some of it's not new, some of it's known, but the big difference is through MRIs and being able to literally see what's going on in the brain has helped us better understand how to teach the science, how to teach reading, and how to assess it. So that's the biggest difference. My 32nd year in education, so when I first learned how to teach reading, we didn't have this information. So that's the big change with it. What it's not is it's not this one way type of thing. It's not just phonics. So I know, no offense to the governor, when she says we're going to go back to basics, sort of hate that phrase only because it gives that impression that we're going to go back to the Guppy reader, for those who like Little House on the Prairie, and go back to basics and teach phonics. We've always taught phonics. We're just the science of reading has showed us how to teach it better. So I'll put it that way. It's also not we're going to go by the science of reading and teach it. Okay? It really is about the teacher practice. That's where you'll see in a few moments where we're focusing on the district. So the best way to describe what this looks like, there's a Dr. Hollis Scarborough, who's a psychologist, back in the late 90s, came out with this visual called the Scarborough's Rope. I gave you a little handout that's on there too, so it's easier to see. And really what he's done is shown that there's these multiple strands that go into a student's ability to read. And two big strands, one being language comprehension, one being word recognition. But within each of those, there's all these little strands of what does that mean? And you'll see it get tighter, and it gets tighter and more intricate the more proficient a student becomes as a reader. So when they move to that skilled reading, all of that's working in unison simultaneously. It's not necessarily one before the other, but we're going to see in a few minutes that there's a sequential process, a systematic process in how to introduce all these skills. The other view of this is called the simple view of reading. Basically taking that rope and saying you have decoding, you have language comprehension, and together that gives you reading comprehension. Where the issues come is when decoding or language comprehension isn't up to snuff. So on this slide, it shows you, it could have been before you thought, oh, they're weak in decoding, but somehow they're still comprehending, and that's okay. Or they're comprehending, they're just not decoding, and that's okay. No, neither one is okay. And the worst case, or the most challenging is when both sides of that rope are weak. So you need all of those pieces to work together. So to break it down even further, and I gave you this visual on the handout too, each of those pieces of the rope have so many strands involved. So you'll notice on this visual, it talks only about K1 and 2, because one of the things that's come out through the research is that I will say, have we always known this? Yeah, we knew it, but now we have proof of it. That if by the end of second grade, students aren't really skilled and have been introduced these finer pieces of reading in a very systematic way, they're not going to get it. So back in my day, the 80s, it may have been said, you know what, she'll get it by the end of third grade, and I would say that to parents at a parent conference, it's going to happen as a kindergarten teacher. It's going to happen. Well, it doesn't just happen. There's all these finer skills have to be taught specifically. So again, what's natural and what's not natural? So on the next slide, it talks about listening comprehension is 3 processing systems. It shows the brain. This process is the natural process. So when they talk about phonological processing, that's all auditory. You're talking about an infant, you're saying mama and dada. Do you want the ball? Say ball. And you mimic it back. All of that oral language that you do with your children, very small children, that's natural. The brain's wired to do that. It's wired to take those sounds, make meaning of those sounds, and put it in the context of, I want it out. Right? So that's all the natural part. What's not natural, and that's on the next slide, is taking all those sounds and now putting those squiggly things we call letters, attaching those sounds to it. That's the orthographic processing system. So that's where sometimes, or often as a kindergarten teacher, a parent might say, but their language is so rich and they really understand all this. Right, but the hard part is how do they take all of that information, attach it to a letter, take those letters, put it into strings of words, and then to take those words and put it into sentences. So that's the part that it's not natural and needs to be taught explicitly. So this 3 processing system, the phonological, which is all auditory, everything you hear, along with orthographic, which is putting it connected to the written word basically, attaching those letters to make meaning, and then that meaning into context, that's the big shebang of the science and vision. So I've been here in years past, depending on some of you who've been with me through my journey, and we've talked about the balanced literacy model that we have used in the district. So we're going to talk about how we've shifted to what's called more of a structured literacy, what the difference is. So the next one shows a visual of balanced literacy versus structured literacy. I'm not going to say we were 100% balanced literacy in the way this models it, because I don't believe we were, whole language is that scary word to it. I believe we were in between this balanced literacy and structured literacy. But balanced literacy would say, students reading with me, and they've got the book in front of them, I might say to them, look at the picture. Let's look at the pictures first and do a picture. Okay, what we've learned is, you would think, like, how did I not know this? It's over-reliance on the pictures and not the words. We need them to look at the words. So in a balanced literacy class, we often have little books that said, the ball is blue, the ball is green. Every time you turn the page, the color of the ball changed, but the sentence was that pattern, the ball is. So often when they got to the word orange and couldn't decode it, I would go, well, look, what's the picture? Oh, orange. They weren't decoding, they were just matching the color of the ball to the word. Structured literacy is saying, no, we want kids to use the word. We want readers to use the word to decode, not the picture. We're going to talk about how resources have changed to make that happen. So when we talk about resources, elementary classroom, the teacher is teaching multiple content lessons a day. So we need to have programs. We're more program driven than at a secondary level. So one of the things that we have purchased over time is it's researched and based on the science of reading is Haggerty Phonemic Awareness. So this is at our pre-K through second grade classrooms. It's all oral language, so that book is the only thing the teacher has. Kids get nothing. It's about 10 to 15 minutes at the most, and you're in a circle, and they're doing a lot of manipulating of sounds. The teacher might say had, drop the and replace it with bu. What do you have? Bad. Let's do this. So they're playing with all the little components of words called phonemes auditorily. What the science of reading has shown us is if the student can't manipulate those sounds before we get to writing, and attaching, or rather get to reading of the word, that's going to be difficult. So we need to make sure that that's secure. But we begin that in preschool.
Can I add to that,
Yes.
Tony, too? Because a lot of the phonemic awareness can happen, it doesn't have to happen necessarily during that 10 to 15 minutes of direct instruction. So if a teacher is lining up a class of kids, she could say, if your name starts with t, line up, right? So kids are hearing that. So it can be during transitions, it can happen at any time throughout the day.
That would be the above and beyond.
Yeah.
The difference with the science of reading would be is like this, like you can't do, I would say probably back when I was teaching, that would be my phonemic awareness teaching, just the that. We've shown the teachers that they need this, everyone gets this systematic instruction, but how do you work it in during other natural components of the day so it's not just those 10 minutes, like you're right.
Yeah.
And then foundations, how do you go into that decoding? How do you start talking about those squiggles on the page, okay, to a student, connect them to sound? So foundations is through the Wilson Language Program, and we've talked about Wilson before. I know Carrie's, we put a bunch of teachers through the summer on Wilson language, which is more of a 4th grade on up. But beginning in preschool through 3rd grade, students start learning about decoding, attaching sounds to letters. This is where we teach handwriting. So we don't teach handwriting, we do. And then phonics. And again, this is 30 minutes from kindergarten to 3rd. It's 30 minutes a day, direct. But again, as Renee said, now they come to me to do some writing conferencing about a piece they're writing about. I can connect it back to, well, remember when we were doing foundations this morning? So you're always connecting back to these very explicit teaching. But at least we know now every student across grade levels are getting that systematic instruction. So now, how do you put this into practice? You're teaching all of these skills in isolation. So there's something called decodable readers. So if you go back to my example of the balls, reading the balls, you're relying on the pictures, well, kids still need to practice their reading. So Geos, which is just a brand, has developed these decodable readers that support all of the parts of Scars Burroughs Road. The difference is, in these readers, they're high interest, and they on a multitude of topics, and there are illustrations, but you can't decode the word because of the illustration. That's not going to help you. So they really have to practice what they're learning. With Geos, these different books are introduced at different times that match the sequence of foundations and of Haggerty. So they've done whatever lesson in foundations, there's a Geos book to use to practice what they've learned. So again, it's very systematic. It's not by chance the book the teacher is studying. So now what happens beyond 3rd grade? For 4 through 6, we use something called Words Their Way, and this is really a program that talks about spelling. It really goes into that orthographic processing. How do they recognize and create and store and retrieve that visual representation of the word? So they're going to start doing word sorts based on patterns such as initial consonants, final consonants, short vowels, long vowels. So they're now manipulating words. It's a small graphic with that colored piece to the left is teachers do assessments and then look at all these subcomponents of what the student did. Say, okay, maybe I have a group of students who need some work on double consonants or double vowels. And you can really hone in on what that student needs. And then one of the last things we have is all our elementary and middle school level, 6th grade level, we have a book. So the other books are those controlled text decodable readers. Well, at some point we're hoping by the end of 2nd grade, definitely 3rd grade, they're ready to start practicing real authentic text. So we invested into these book rooms that have text sets. And so they start at the lowest level to the highest level. Depending on where the group of students are, teachers can go get a text set and work with students on their reading an authentic text. But we don't want to forget about writing. I know it's called the science of reading, but the rubber hits the road with writing. Renee and I have talked about this forever. That you really can see is you can teach reading through writing very much so. So there is this writer's book that, of course, they've come out with, which really does show you all the different pieces of writing, same idea and how important it is. So we use a writer's workshop model that starts in kindergarten, not that they're not writing in high school, but the true workshop model starts in kindergarten, goes through 6th grade, and it's based on different units of study such as narrative, opinion, informational, persuasive. And again, students are writing, especially those upper levels, you can see are they taking what they've learned through foundations, through Haverly, all of these things they've done as a primary student, are they putting it into practice. So that's like the big picture of things we do. But as I said, investing in the practitioners is what makes the difference. So can't we do enough for our instructional coaches, because that's where the rubber hits the road. Also, they began last summer. We conducted 2 days of science of reading for pre-K through 3 and another 2 days for 4 through 6. And then they followed up this summer with another day of science of reading for pre-K through 6. And I didn't put on there, there was also something for 4 through 6. And we continue that. And what's not on here is what they're doing in the classrooms. They're in the classroom all the time on literacy, supporting teachers. And then there's some secondary work they have.
Yeah, so at the secondary level, it's interesting because when you go to become a math teacher or a science teacher, really your work is focused on the science or the math. There's usually maybe one reading class you have to take, but it's pretty limited. So we worked with our learning coaches and thought together, like, what can we offer to help our secondary teachers who may not be experts yet in the area of reading, to give them some strategies to use with kids who may not quite be on grade level. So Gabby and Erin worked together and they developed the reading feast. It was a strategies for teachers to work on comprehension within their classroom. So it didn't matter whether you were a science teacher, a social studies teacher, a math teacher. It was strategies that they could turn around and use immediately this fall in their classroom. The root of the matter was word attack skills. So helping kids identify words within text that they may not be familiar with. So we see that a lot in social studies or science, in using roots and prefixes and good practices that we probably commonly use and just don't even know it. So having teachers explicitly be able to identify those skills to students in the moment, so that they're able to apply them to much more of their reading across the content areas.
So to continue that support to teachers and to staff, we're going to be working, the next slide, on our professional learning opportunities this year. So we contracted with Kate Franz, who's from SU, who, we need to invest in our building leaders, because they're the ones who are going to be able to lead this, work with teachers. They're in there every day. So matter of fact, tomorrow's her first day with us. We contracted, she'll be back at least 4 more times during the year, during our instructional council time, to keep working with leaders on all these different components of reading so we understand it, and then she will also support, like, I'm the middle school principal or AP, and I'm going into a classroom, what should it look like, what should I look for? In addition, she'll be here on our both superintendent conference days to do some breakout sessions with staff, E12. Dr. Julia Lindsay is a researcher and writer. It's just one of her books. We've contracted with her to come in the spring. She'll be our keynote speaker for the keynote, and she will specifically work on breakout sessions with secondary teachers to support that. One of the last things we have is, SED did come out with literacy briefs, and they're available online there. And, they're lovely. Do I think they're going to change anyone's teaching? Absolutely not. It's what SED should do. They get a very broad view of what the science of reading is, and it's up to us to figure out best way to approach it. We'll say, just as a side note, my only frustration with SED is they have come out with a lot of things for pre-K through 3. For example, we're going to go in the process this year doing a curriculum review of ELA, or of our literacy P through 12, to see where we stand with this and where do we need to go to improve our instruction as a district. The issue is they've only focused on P through 3. When we reach out to them to say, what about 4 through 12? That's where the questions are. There was something called, what were you and I part of? Years ago.
Reading first.
Reading First. Okay, so Reading First, which was years ago and focused only on K through 3, there's a lot of research out there about that. And I feel SED is taking the easy way out, saying, well, we'll get to 4 through 12, but as you talk to the researchers in the field, so to Kate, to Julia, they'll say, that's where a hole is 4 through 12. And researchers right now are trying to figure out better, how do we support that end. We have some things in place now, we know we need to do more, but I will say that's where the exciting part's going to happen, is what the research does in that area. So that's what we get. What questions can we answer?
Thank you. This has been really helpful. I've really enjoyed it. Very interesting approach. I'm wondering, when you get a student to grade, related to what you were just saying, when you get a student to grade 3 and you're thinking, not quite there yet, and knowing that, 4 through 12, how key reading is to all the subjects, and then, they're probably not going to be able to be as successful as they might be if they're really struggling to read. Do we have programming in place?
So the good part is, yes, is that we have that all the way during their time with us. They're going to like a student support team meeting. So we're not waiting until 3rd grade. I guarantee that kid has shown some concerns probably back in 1st grade or 2nd grade. So, we've made this push to have reading teachers and staff pushing into classrooms at P through 3 specifically, so they can be more hands-on support than just pulling 6 kids out. So they're in there more often. So we've really changed a lot of practices that way. But in addition, buildings are meeting weekly in many cases, the elementary, on those kind of students to say, okay, little Johnny in 1st grade is struggling, what can we do? Looking not just at the reading teachers, but the classroom teacher, the special ed teacher, because of our inclusive model, who's at that grade level. Whether or not that student's a special ed student, we still have someone who's very skilled at diversifying instruction and giving very targeted instruction. So all together, you have all these people trying to figure that out. But yes, for that student who still is struggling, so we do have, Carrie's department has really invested in a lot this past summer, Wilson language, which is very much sequential, typically done in a pull-out kind of format for kids who need really heavy-duty phonics kind of instruction. So we do have that kind of program, and also taking some of the things I've shown you and using some of that.
And just to emphasize, I think the key here is that it's a whole team approach.
Yes.
Where probably when you went to school, I went to school, it was, well, we're going to send students to this other person who has all of the knowledge, and they're going to quote unquote fix the concern. And that's not the approach that we're taking now. And I think that's what makes this much more effective working with students, because working around and strategizing together, that's where you're going to get the knowledge base to helping that student move forward.
So I looked at this a little too late, and so I didn't have time to do my own research, which I will do, but I thought I'd throw the ball to you first, maybe you can help me out. Has anyone thought of cross-pollination or parallel tracking anything in an ESL context with some of what we're looking at here?
I'm not sure if I'm following exactly your question.
Well, I taught a lot of ESL for
Right.
a lot of years, and a lot of what I'm looking at here, I used in an ESL context. And I don't know if there's been any research that's been done to
I don't know if there's research specifically in that, but yes, the the approach here is very similar. So especially when you talk to a teacher of foreign language and how they approach teaching, French to a student. Talking to Cindy Cronin, who was a former French teacher, here, and she will say, "Oh my gosh, this is pretty much the way I taught French. I start back at the basics." And you say, so I think there's that in there. Also going back to Joe's team approach, I know often the person who used to probably be out of those discussions who are now brought into the discussion more is our speech teacher, speech and language teacher. Because so much of what they do in their knowledge base is so much of that, especially the auditory part and hearing language and manipulating sounds. So it's using that. I think you raise a good point. It's also returning to our E&L teachers to say, what do you get that we can use too.
Awesome, thanks.
So Don, I would add to that there's a saying that we have, is that what's good for an English language learner is good for all students, right? So the things that we do specifically to help an English language learner learn English is, I would say, it doesn't hurt those high structure moments. It doesn't hurt the kids who don't need it, but it helps the kids who do.
So you talked about the resources for the elementary, the books and stuff. And those resources are available in each classroom?
Yes, everything I showed you, I'm just thinking through, everything I showed you is available in every classroom at elementary, depending on your grade, which is usually P3.
Great, yeah.
And then that level, that book room, is a school-wide book room, is of use to the entire building, in every building.
That's great.
The district has put in a lot of good money on that. So now the part is really supporting the teacher and the learning, and how do you move towards bringing in some of these specialists.
I've been trying to press my button.
Chrissy said.
So I actually have a couple of questions.
Yeah.
First, thanks very much for sharing information. I wonder about you talked a little bit about the diversifying, but I wonder about the differentiating part, especially when we talk about the different levels that students come in, even in kindergarten, in regards to their skill sets. How do we make sure that we have kids, we always talk about differentiating, not just being for a kid below grade level, but above grade level. Because I've been in classrooms where they're doing Haggerty, and there's kids that clearly get it, kids that can probably teach it, and there's other ones that don't really know what's going on. So how do you manage that?
So I think that's a good question, because
Thanks.
we get a lot of, whether it's a parent or a teacher sometimes saying, do I have to have her really go through Haggerty, or do I have to have her go through Foundations? She knows it. I think what we've learned is that, sort of to piggyback on Renee, it's not going to hurt her to still be part of that lesson. Everyone needs that foundation, because she might be a good reader, so let's take that kid who's really skilled, but doesn't know the rules of decoding, doesn't know what to do when there's two vowels together, hasn't really thought that through, she just knows it. When you start seeing those issues, typically, is now they get to 4th grade or 5th grade, and the multisyllabic words and the content creating really happens. All of a sudden, this kid who presented themselves as a strong reader is having difficulties, as we really haven't taught them the rules. So that's why we don't let anyone skip out of that 30-minute lesson or those 10 minutes of Haggerty, but they don't need more than that. A child who is struggling with it might need what we call a double dose. So that student might need a double dose of Foundations or a double dose of Haggerty. So in a small group, the teacher can do that and give some more support.
Yeah, so that's my next question is, it seems like this is very structured. I mean, I'm familiar with Foundations and Haggerty. And there's a lot of assessment that goes on. So how does that play in, and how have you structured that so that isn't taking away from too much instruction?
Yeah,
That's a tricky one, right?
It is,
Yeah.
it is. So with Foundations, they typically give a short assessment, they'll give at the end of a unit of study to look at. They won't give, there's options along the way, there's always options of assessment in these programs, but I think, one of the things we keep talking to teachers about in these workshops is, not every kid needs that assessment. And pulling a small group, if these kids just aren't successful, you know more, dig deeper with them. You don't need to dig deeper with everyone. We're also doing universal screening with our Renaissance style platform. So again, go back to that, look at that, see how they're doing, and see what you're seeing through Foundations. So there is some assessment, but we don't do every single piece of the assessment. Teachers have autonomy, to decide what they need to do or not.
And that's being overseen by the reading teachers?
The assessment piece?
Yes, the teachers' decisions about.
That's on
that's
that,
totally
that's on
on
them, and
Got
they
it.
have their PLCs with each other to have that discussion.
Sweet.
But again, back to what Joe said, by having reading teachers in the room now,
For sure.
there's easily, that's high dialogue teachers do, and so it's much easier to have that conversation back and forth. And I think it's helped the reading teacher, because if all you're doing is working with below-level students all day, you forget, what is the second grade reader supposed to look like, So now being in there with everyone, and also they may be working with a challenging group, the above-level group that needs some help. I think it's raised the bar for everyone.
Got it. My last question. So having been in education for a long time like you, right? We've seen stuff come and go.
Oh, yeah.
How is the K-3 faculty buying in?
Oh, hugely.
Good.
I will say,
Because
yeah.
that's a huge part of it,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, very much so. I think we're in the land of the reading league, for good or bad, we won't talk about that. But we're in the land of the reading league. So teachers in our area have had the opportunity on their own to go to so much, they sought PBA. We've had, in respect to the teachers, they have signed up, I won't go into it, something called Letters Stream, that they've taken through the Teacher Center. So they want this. They know they need it. Depending on the program they come out of, some are more prepared than others with it, but we know that it's our responsibility as a district to make sure all the teachers get what they need.
Thanks, Tony.
No, thank you.
And Joe, thanks for fixing it.
Do it all. Well, I guess if you had so much information, not many questions.
That's
Thank you.
okay.
That was very informative, though.
Thank you.
Yeah, great.
Thanks, Christine. So we're gonna transition now. I'm gonna ask Danielle and Amanda to come up and begin. And we're going to skip down to final improvements in building the future presentation and discussion that we have here this evening. We'll start with the first item of FPF for Board of Education. And we'll provide some context for him and take that policy.
By all means, Joe.
So I want to start by saying that, first, the funding improvements in building the future committees that we had over the course of quite a few years have really guided this work. And I want to thank the Facilities Committee for having provided feedback at our last facilities meeting, which has helped kind of gear where we currently stand with some of the options and the recommendations that we have to do as a whole board discussion. So just to kind of bring it full circle, this is a conversation that has been going on for quite some time. As you see on this slide here, back in the fall of 2018, 2019, the original Funding the Future Committee was formed in the district. We had a consultant work with our staff, a group that the administration wasn't really a part of. It was consisted of community members, teachers, parents, you name it. And they were charged with looking at the question, are there options that might provide more effective ways or patterns to organize how our K-12 program is implemented and delivered over the next several years? And so that was the charge of this committee. And what we wanted to highlight here is that one of the recommendations, and I know you've heard us say this before, when our most recent funding improvements in building the future committee met, and last year we had consultants work with us again, is this configuration that was identified in the first study, which is scenario BX, 4 elementary schools serving pre-K to grade 3, 1 upper elementary intermediate school serving grades 4 through 6, 1 junior high school serving 7 through 9, and 1 high school serving grades 10 through 12. Obviously, COVID, spring of 2020, got in our way, and it forced us to kind of put things on hold and reevaluate. And we're fortunate that the board, previous boards, and this current board, allowed us to work with a new committee last year to guide us moving forward. And so when you look at some of the reasons why it's important for us to reconfigure, you'll notice these same areas and opportunities for student growth and the benefits for our staff. It's consistent whether you're looking at the original funding improvements, funding the future committee work, or what we've most recently done through the summer of 2023 and 24. And just to recap that new committee last school year was focused on, because we knew that we had pretty much made the decision that 7th grade needed to get onto the main campus. That was relevant in both studies. The previous boards had started working down that pathway. We were set to go out with a capital project vote in 2021, 22, and then based on funding, maximum cost allowances, we had to scale that project back. And so we started thinking about how we can do things in a more efficient way that's fiscally responsive to our community and takes advantage of all of the building aid units and the funding that we get from New York State. And so knowing that that was put out there to the public, we really wanted this funding improvements in building the future committee in the fall of 23-24 to focus on what that PK to 6 elementary programming looks like. And lo and behold, through multiple conversations, we end up with scenario B, which you have seen in prior presentations, which you will notice is consistent to that scenario from the original committee. Again, why is this important? Same types of opportunities for students when we think about advanced coursework options for all students, availability for athletics, fine performing arts, extracurricular opportunities for grades 6 through 12, universal pre-K. We heard a presentation this evening about the importance of reading and literacy skills, and so getting students here earlier on in their educational career. And from the perspective of staff, when we look at the grade bands for New York State teachers, the way we currently have configured grade middle school, we have elementary certified faculty and we have secondary certified faculty based on New York State certification. So by looking at a redistribution and reconfiguration, both committees have recognized the fact that it makes more sense to have those teachers clustered together. And so when they're working in that physical location together, they're more likely to ensure that there's consistent instruction across the district for our students. So it's not a matter of a student getting this teacher or that teacher or this school building and that school building, because we can ensure that everyone is working together. And so there's that benefit from that staff perspective. And last but not least, when we look at our attendance zones, and you've seen this from reports that we have, when we break down by demographics, race, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, students labeled as having a disability, there's discrepancies across the district based on the way our attendance zones are currently configured. And when you think about the fact that we're transporting students from the Radisson area all the way across town below the river, we have 3 school buildings below the river, we have 2 above, and the majority of our student population actually falls above that river. So looking at the totality of some of these benefits, this is really why we're coming forward with the recommendation that we have for you to consider. And when we think about how do we make this happen, we have 5 key critical steps that we have to follow, and the first being that the Board of Education has to commit to that grade and building level configuration. We know we've been having that conversation over the last year. The district then has to propose that capital improvement plan and funding plan that's going to support that new configuration, which we believe we have here for you this evening. Ultimately, the board's going to have to approve a resolution for the capital improvement project, which would be aligned to our funding improvements in building the future long-range plan. And then we're going to rely on our school community to approve, hopefully, the funding for this multi-year construction project. And if the board agrees to that, we will be looking at a February 2025 vote for this potential capital improvement project. And then pending successful community support with a vote in February of 2025, we would then start to communicate and solidify a multi-year timeline and phasing plan for this new configuration. So what does that configuration look like? You've seen scenario B before, prior reports, but you'll notice here we've kind of subdivided that to scenario B1 and B2, mainly because when you think about the two aging buildings that we have, the most aging, Eldon and Van Buren, there's been talk about utilizing Van Buren, and then Eldon becomes swing space, vice versa. We have some flexibility there, so that's not a decision that has to happen now, even with this work. And what I think we're highlighting here is that this just buys us a little bit more time to think about what we do with those buildings, because it takes so long in order to do this work. But you'll notice, based on previous board feedback and conversation from our funding improvements and building the future committee, we've pretty much settled on the scenario, which is, again, Baker High School being grades 10 through 12, Derby being 7 through 9, Ray being 4 through 6, so 3 years in each of those grade levels, and then PK through 3 being the focus of our elementary schools. I'm going to let, I feel like I've been talking for a while, Amanda take us through a little bit of where we have been and where we're potentially going with this project vote.
Good evening. So the first slide is the master plan. I think everyone, if you're not, is familiar with this overall master plan. It's something that we've been working with for quite a few years. It's been a definite benefit, I think, from our end to have a district that's planning this far in advance, because it gives you kind of that structure to follow moving forward. So you can see at the top with Project 1 and Project 2, those are the projects that you currently have underway. Project 1 is the Derby project, which you know is currently under construction. And then Project 2 is both the field, Baker, Ray, Eldon, and a little bit of work at Derby. And that's currently in design. And as you know, you broke ground on the field last week, so congratulations on that. We're very excited about that. Joe had a nice video, so we were very excited about that as well. So that's really the second bar across the top. That really talks about the, between Baker, Derby, and Ray, the work that you currently have and that you've planned for and voted on. So the next step in this process is really talking about that proposed Project 3. So Project 3 was always on this docket. We knew that it was going to be a combination of the elementary schools and then propose the second part of Derby, which would really allow you to bring the 7th grade over to the main campus. What we didn't know is what the configuration and what you really wanted to do with your elementary buildings. So that was kind of the unknown. So this really sort of flushes out, and through the work that you've done in the past couple of years, really flushes out a proposed plan for that. So we weren't sure if it was going to be proposed as like a 1 project or 2 projects. Right now it is proposed as a single project with 3 phases. So the benefit of the 3 phases, which I'll go into in the next slide, is really that it allows you to maximize your cost allowance twice for your buildings. So we really want to maximize that cost allowance because that's the money that the state gives you to work on those buildings. And that's kind of the challenge we ran into with Derby the first time, was that we were hitting that cost allowance, and to go above that really wasn't cost effective. So the proposed solution was to break Derby into 2 projects. So we're essentially doing that with this proposed project with all of your buildings, so that you're able to maximize that cost allowance twice. So what it also does is spread that project out over several years, which you'll see in the schedule, and we'll talk about. So it's not gonna be something that's gonna happen immediately. It's a pre-planned project that will happen over the next 5 to 7 years, because we have that 5-year window between cost allowances, and we need those buildings to reach that window to be able to continue to do the work. So one of the, and I'll just note till we go to the next slide, the configuration they made a decision on that we added to this slide was moving 4, 5 to Ray. So the 7th grade we had always talked about. So 7th grade moves to Derby, and 4, 5 moves to Ray, with an addition I'll talk about in the next slide. And then your elementary buildings become pre-K 3 buildings, which gives you the ability to have pre-K in those buildings in a more substantial way. So the first phase of Project 3 would be the pretty substantial addition to Ray Middle School. What this allows is room for 3 grade levels at that building, and allows for some reconfiguration to really get that building to be an upper elementary building versus the sort of in-between 6, 7 building that it is now. In addition to that, I just talked about the pre-K at all of the elementary buildings. So what we would do is the elementary buildings this round would be really focused on converting classrooms into appropriate pre-K spaces. So sizing them appropriately, getting the correct scale of casework and cubbies and things like that, furniture into those buildings, along with a little bit of infrastructure work. Obviously, we did the building condition survey in the last year, and you have that information. We want to make sure that we're always looking back to that list as well, to make sure we're layering those infrastructure items on top of this program work, so that we're constantly addressing your building needs as well in terms of infrastructure. So this project, and you'll notice Eldon, and it could be, as Joe mentioned, it could be Van Buren, depending on which building you decide you want to use as swing space. That would get some work as well. We'd have to decide what that really means, but that would essentially potentially prepare either one of those buildings to be used for 7th grade as a swing space while Durkee is being constructed. So that becomes phase 1 of Project 3. And then in terms of phase 2, that would be us going back and doing the addition to Derby. So we will have met the 5-year goal there. So the aid will be renewed at Derby. So that would allow you to put the addition on Derby for the 7th grade. We're showing it here. Originally, it had been defined as maybe a 2nd floor. Obviously, we're gonna continue to look at those options as we move forward. So we'll get more into the details of that. So we don't know exactly what it's gonna look like, but we do know we need to add the appropriate number of classrooms to Derby. And then in addition to that, we would go back in and look at replacing the stadium turf, because we know, even though it was done in 2016 based on the building condition survey and its lifespan, that we're gonna have to think about doing that. So that has been included in there, as well as some reconstruction of the road, Albert Palmer Drive that goes around the main campus, and then some infrastructure improvements. And then we also added Eldon in there as well. There might be some additional work that needs to happen there. And that, again, that could be interchangeable with Van Buren, depending on how you wanted to move forward. And then the 3rd phase of Project 3. So we'll talk a little bit more about timeline, but we are into the future 2029 timeframe. We would go back to Ray, because we will be able to renew that cost allowance, and work on the existing building and just making sure that we have everything that we're gonna have in the addition renovated for Ray, as well as infrastructure improvements. In terms of Baker, looking at technology and classroom renovations there, as well as infrastructure improvements, and then coming back to all the elementaries again. Specifically Palmer and McNamara, looking at gym additions on those 2 buildings so that they have more full-size athletic facilities, and doing some kitchen and cafeteria renovations, as well as some more extensive renovations, again, at Van Buren or Eldon, depending on which you choose, to kind of take care of some of those infrastructure items.
Do you anticipate, next question, sorry. Do you anticipate, once we say we use Eldon as a swing space and put the 7th grade in there while we're renovating Derby, when we can move the 7th graders into Derby, what do we anticipate
So that's where the boards and the district will have, further conversation as we move forward, because we don't, I'm hopeful that SED changes the way that they're funding for some of the new construction, because those buildings are ultimately, those two specifically, they're not where they need to be, and, it makes more sense to, build new, even if it's in the exact same location, so whether one goes completely, bulldozed down and then we build up in that space. I think it gives the boards at that time, the ability to make some decisions. We'll know a little bit more about where we are with enrollment, whether we put the work and effort at the school again below the river or above the rivers. I think it again buys us time, but something will have to happen to that space, because we're still not really addressing in its capacity Van Buren or Eldon in this work, just because we don't know. And
Depending on enrollment, once seventh grade goes to Derby, we've adjusted Ray at the elementary.
we
may not
could with,
be-
you're right, we may not, or we could find that with Micron and some of the other advanced manufacturing, if all of that comes to fruition, which I'm not hopeful that it does, because it'll do a lot for our community and Central New York as a whole. My prediction would be that we're gonna find that we're not going down an elementary building, we're actually
Right.
still at 5, and or adding a 6th one someplace because of growth.
Right.
That's, again, if I had a crystal ball, that's what I'd be saying.
Yeah.
But it just delays that decision a couple of years for this future board.
Joe, have we had the opportunity to look at the land on this side of the river in case the state ed does give us the green light on changing the program?
So we've talked about that for the last couple of years. So when we were initially looking at, do we in the previous funding improvements and funding future committee, do we eliminate Van Buren and Eldon and build something here on the main campus? There is space. There's still some space available, I believe, in Radisson, but we exchanged when we built this facility here, transportation. There is space on the main campus, but we also have to think about, we're already moving another whole grade level over there. What does that do to traffic? So there's a lot that would still need to go into making final determinations, but I personally believe the easiest thing to do if we get state aid approval in the Mandalay country is if we have swing space, knock a building down and build up in the same location. Because you think about Van Buren and you think about Eldon, there's nothing that says we can't go up a level when you think of that footprint if we needed to fill more students. Some of our elementary schools have a 2-story wing.
And it seems to me if we're in the scenario you're envisioning that I think is very possible in terms of growth, and we do get the ability to build a new building on our main campus seems to be the most attractive place to put something like that. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree with you.
So one of the key elements here is the amount of state aid we get. Just like Amanda referenced, the Durkee project, since we're doing a major renovation now, couldn't start for another 5 years, because you only max aid every 5 years. So I think, I'm correct, we are expecting to get around 91% or more state aid on the current project. Now, does it differ between a renovation and an addition, because that gym really is on open space, so is it considered an addition?
It is considered an addition.
And what's the aid on addition?
It's similar to renovation, it's just not as much, and specifically gyms don't get, that
Right.
much aid,
Right,
but.
classrooms get the most. Yeah.
Correct. But we balance that with the classroom work and things like that, and that's what makes small additions and things like that possible.
Okay.
And your fiscal advisor has taken that into account. So we've given them all of that information and they've calculated that in.
And I know fiscal advisors is the one that really comes to us to here's the best construction to maximize the aid package you're getting, so. But if we were to build new right now, the state aid is something like 50% or?
Yeah, it really,
It's
they
really-
basically give you the aid that you have on your existing building, which is never enough. If you look at what your elementary buildings generate, somewhere between 10 and $12 million, depending on the size, that's what they're really willing to give you for aid for a new elementary, which is just not even possible to
So-
even fathom. So that's really the challenge with Eldon and Van Buren
Yeah.
that we're really up against.
So the issue right now is it's prohibitive to build new. Now, if you remember, we submitted the resolution to New York State School Boards this year, and that's our resolution, is to allow similar aid on new build as you do on renovations, as if you can prove, it's hard to say what formula, people can argue about that. But it is a situation where, and we're not alone. We got, what is it, a 75-year-old buildings, Van Buren and Eldon, 75-year-old buildings. So even a non-construction person like me knows that we probably could build more efficiently than to continue to renovate and renovate and renovate. And you've got some major issues there because you've got wood roofs on those that, could have, if you got a fire or something, it'd be pretty bad.
Yeah.
But Jeremy, since you're our delegate to the New York State business meeting, you can get that through and that'll help us, okay?
I'm on it.
Did we not tell them?
I don't think you know, I think you just found out.
I did, yeah.
Sam,
That was actually last time.
Sam has your back.
Sam's your back.
I missed one meeting.
That's what happens.
That was the one.
Sorry.
So I have a couple of numbers questions, I'm not sure who to ask these of, but
Ask him and we'll probably tag team.
some of it is just me making sure that I'm not just way off in the wrong field on this. What I'm seeing at the bottom of this from the facilities committee is the building aid ratio. Nick kind of touched this question off for me. Building aid ratio is 86.1%, so that puts us on the number for 13.9 of the cost.
Yep.
And then
The district
Right.
taxpayers.
Right, exactly, and that's what I'm looking at down below that, the use of reserves, you got three options there, and then the impact on the tax level. So 13.9% of that 242 million is about 33.7 million, and so I want to make sure I'm doing this right. What we're saying is that on these three different options, it's the 33.7 million minus whatever we take out of reserves. That's what would go to the taxpayers.
Correct.
The net of that.
Yep.
But also taking into consideration, we have debt coming off. So when you look at the total impact from where our current budget is with debt falling off, that's why fiscal is working with King & King and the district, and that's more detailed information that is under the executive content that really lays out the true impact on the taxpayer, more closely aligning to year after year.
So where can we find those numbers?
I don't know if you wanna pull it up.
I will pull it up, yeah. I think I.
It just sounds like those are a little more accurate.
Yep.
Yeah, this is just a summary. Those are definitely what you want to look at.
So before we pull that up, just for those that are watching online, so in total, we didn't talk about this slide.
Yep.
This proposed multi-year project 3 is 242 million, and it seems like a high number, but when you look at the breakdown for phases, taking into consideration our building condition survey and all the work that we've done, when you look at it from in 2022 and 2023, this community supported capital projects totaling over $101 million, and we're doing that work in a 2 to 3 year span, right? And then you take this work, as Amanda mentioned, over the course of 5, 6, 7, 8 years, and you extrapolate that out. I mean, it's pretty consistent. We're just basically asking to move forward with a direction as opposed to having multiple projects come up every single year. And it really sets the district up to plan forward because of the impact that this will have on grade level configurations across the district. And so with that, those options A, B, and C listed below are examples of what could help offset the district share, the community share from state aid with use of reserves. And again, that's beyond the debt service. And you see 3 examples there. One, if we use $16 million, which we currently have. Option B is going to require us to use other potential reserves, which there's the ability to do that. And obviously, option C would require us to use even more from other reserves that we currently have. But I can say confidently, and the board should know, based on the last meeting, we have over $60 million in the capital reserves available for use tomorrow, based on our board action. So with that, let me pull up the additional documents.
And as you're doing that, you sort of, you took a glancing shot at one of my other questions. I'm sorry. So for those 3 different options, depending on what we use out of reserves, somewhere that it kind of cascades down, something like $16.5 million and $12.5 million, $10.5 million, right in that ballpark. And we're talking about those numbers over a period of 3, 4, 5 years.
And I think the example that you're going to see on the schedule that I'm going to pull up, it's actually a lot more than just 3, 4, 5 years. In fact, you're going to see it's like 8, I think 9.
So we're not asking taxpayers to pick up $10 million in a single year?
Not at all. No. And again, this is estimated, obviously, because just like with our regular school budget, we estimate, and our fiscal advisors have taken a very conservative approach, because the worst thing we can do is find ourselves in a position where we're asking taxpayers to pay more. So they're very conservative in the figures that you see here.
So I just want to say too, that in facilities, when I saw this slide, I was like, oh my God, what is this? But it's really a misrepresentation, because you have to break those numbers down. And I saw that percent on tax levy, 3.04%. What does that mean? Because it's not a 3% increase on the tax levy, really. And you need to look at, number one, the stat I'd like to see is how much we're spending a year over the last 10 or 15 years on billing. Because when I tried to do some numbers on my own, what I figure out is that this in total is not much more than we have historically spent. I think last year, 12% of our budget went to debt retirement on capital projects. Of 129 million, that's quite a bit of money.
Yeah.
And I think the further analysis you did says it could be a 10 cents per thousand impact.
For a few years, and we'll pull that up on the schedule.
So I hate this slide, because when you look at the total, it can scare you, but when you look at what you're spending on average, and all the difference is you're doing it one project at a time instead of having a plan.
It's actually a very small amount, and that's the conclusion I came to. That's why I wanted to run through the numbers.
Very good, very good.
Because these, I was gonna say, my big reveal was gonna be, I think these numbers that are on this piece of paper are actually not fully, and I might say, not particularly representative of what would actually happen in the out years.
And I think you are correct.
I think you're talking about a fraction of a percentage point, rather than, something above 0 that we're seeing here.
Right, so if we retire some debt, we add some debt, and we keep that tax levy pretty steady. But at the same time, I think if the community looks at this project and they look at the fact that we're willing to look at all 3 phases at once, and again, they all don't have to be done, but we won't have to go back in 3 years or 2 years and ask them for another $80 million or $100 million. And I think that gives us a lot of credibility as a board and a cabinet that we see a vision And we see where this community and this district has to go. And I think by representing it this way in the 3 phases, but one project, I think we should get some pretty good buy-in from our community.
And I think it's really, and that's precisely the message. The way we present this to homeowners and property owners is really important, because we're not going into the debt market looking for 2.5%, 3%. It's not what we're doing. It's actually fantastically, amazingly less than that, which essentially freezes from the debt market. And so the way that this is structured is excellent, and I would hate for these numbers to get out as the numbers that we're actually dealing with, because I think they're not.
So one of the things that we've talked, at least with the board leadership at agenda planning and thinking about things, again, this is how districts typically put information out there for the public. But really, once the board is comfortable with moving forward with a project like this, and we then turn to marketing mode as soon as possible, and we start putting contacts to this project in a way that people can understand and they can get behind. So when you think about promotional videos, when you think about the social media that we have, when you think about the little tidbits that basically show the impact, it's only 10 cents in your, 3 years down the road that's going to impact per thousand. And it's things like that, working with King and their marketing team, and we have some other vendors that we've approached in anticipation for being able to move forward. But it is really in selling what our community is going to get for this work. And I think we have a proven track record over the last few years, and the work that's beginning or being done right now on the main campus is a testament to that. And that will be the shift that we make, so that people aren't concerned with the total value.
Joe, I have a question. So, not having, oh, sorry.
Just to illustrate the point, right? A $250,000 house at 10 cents on 1,000 is $25. That's a lot less scary than 2.5% on 33 million.
The messaging is huge.
Yeah.
The question that I have is, not having done this before, if we start to roll this out, we did talk about presenting the message to the community, and that's huge, right? Is the time frame about right? If we start,
Yes.
when the school year begins to February 2025, is that enough time?
Yes,
Is it too
so
much?
we actually, on our agenda, we have the proposed pre-ref schedule, and Amanda can certainly chime in a little bit more with this. But there is a process, but you can see that we're well within the timeline. We've tentatively scheduled a referendum vote for February 11th. And so we back everything up from there, from the legal requirements to when we have to really start pushing the campaign. We have Hive communications. It is consistent. So when you think about the project that was approved in May of 2023, the Fields and the Baker work, I feel like we're a little bit ahead of the schedule compared to when we made that final decision that year, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, I think the schedule, this is a pretty standard schedule. Obviously, there's some legalities that have to happen with your vote in terms of advertisement and seeker and things like that, and that's all included in this schedule. So you're in a good place from a timeline perspective for a February vote.
So when you look at, just going back to that other schedule, and I'm going to blow this up a little bit, and I'm just using the example of using $16 million, I believe, out of the reserve, which is what we currently have. And that's dedicated solely to capital work.
But not
Not a certain project, no. It's funds available for future capital projects. And Tiffany, you might want to help me a little bit with this one.
Yeah, certainly. Actually, if you scroll up a little bit, you'll notice that they have the building aid percentage ratio. Fiscal advisors assisted us with these projections and numbers, but so it's using our current aid ratio on a project that is 91% aidable. So this is a conservative, these are conservative numbers because we know that we have work that might not be as highly aided that is in our building condition survey and other areas. As they ran through these numbers, you can scroll down a little bit. You can see in here, it incorporates the amount per year that would need to be financed for the projects over the time period. If you could scroll down a little bit.
I'm sorry.
Sorry. You can see that the official bonding would start in 2029, right? Yes. And then it would go through, if you scroll down a little bit, all the way to 2048, I'm sorry, it's a little hard to see, but yeah, so it's a long period of bonding and incorporates our use of the reserves over time as well as state aid and the local share. So if you go to the bottom, at the bottom there, you can see the 3.04% on the left-hand side. But if you scroll to the next page, this breaks it down by year to the actual tax rate.
Very good.
And you'll see the first,
That's the one.
And this is the key for the
That's the
community,
one.
so you can see that the tax rate, again, estimated tax rate increase.
right,
2028-29 school year, they see a 10 cents per thousand
right. And
increase.
that considers debt that's falling off of our schedule over time. So it's not that full 3% that you see.
But it's also good to see, then we go back down to zero, and we go up a little bit, and then we're back down again.
Yep. So again, this is what.
That's the slide we want to get to.
Yeah. And do you have anywhere handy the per thousand tax rate over the last few years? Or, I mean, I'm sure out of your memory, you can say that 6-7 years ago, we were at like $20 per thousand.
Right.
This year we'll be at $16.80
Yes.
per thousand.
Yes.
So
One thing.
now, that's offset because people's houses being what on value, but their per thousand rate, we're trying to do our part to get that down.
Yes.
You just have to take it in 10 years.
I think that's actually a really important part, is if you look at the historics of just our district's taxpayer per thousand rate, it was $21 years ago per thousand assessed, and it was 20. And 2 years ago it was 18, or last year was 18, and this year is 16 and change. So, you know, the way I look at it, the district continues to grow as projected. You know, very great location, I think very desirable here in Baldwinsville. So as we continue to grow, bearing assessments don't go too crazy over this time period. Theoretically, that 10 cents per thousand increase to vastly enhance, improve the district may end up in an overall decrease if things continue to trend with valuation, expansion, and growth within the community. So even though that number is kind of scary when you break it down over that $25 per year, it actually may end up being each individual taxpayer is gonna pay less, but the students of our district are gonna get significantly more because this project's over 10 years. This isn't a one-time deal. And I think that's the important piece is when we look at this over a decade, that project that increase is minuscule because it's not a year after year ask of the voters of the taxpayer. It's a plan that we're, I think, gonna get the biggest bang for every taxpayer's dollar.
I think having a long-range plan and aligning it to our funding improvement and building the future committee is huge. And that, you know, like you said, it's gonna be spaced out over 10 years, and there's a long-range vision for our students, and it's only gonna benefit their education.
So, on this topic of levy and taxes and homeowners, I would like to point something out. members of the board and administration. So we sit here and we talk about this, and we've been saying, the messaging is important. And the messaging really is kind of, it's got at least the initial stages is sort of up to us, right? We're the ones who have the information, we've got to get it out. That's our responsibility. I'm not gonna soapbox it too much, but, so there's been a lot of talk about, Micron moving in and shifts in real estate market and all sorts of things like that. One of the things that gets talked about in this context, legitimately so, is new development, right? New housing, new small business development, new whatever, supply chain that might come in nearby, things like that. There's a really important little thing out there that happens that people who are fiscally very conservative tend to bite on very quickly. So I'm a fiscal nut when it comes to this stuff. I'm the most conservative guy you're gonna come across. Lots of people want free food and free cell phones and free cars and whatever. I want government for free. That's what I want. I want 0 taxes. That's not really gonna probably happen while this board is in operation, but you can always hope. But one of the things that does happen, that folks who are fiscally very conservative, pro-business, it's bait that they like to take, is a thing called the pilot, payment in lieu of taxes, where you kind of lure a new business in, right? The new business wants to show up, maybe an apartment complex, somebody wants to build an apartment complex somewhere, and they go to a local government and say, we'd like a pilot on this, we get to make a payment instead of paying taxes over some number of years. As we're messaging this, we want to make sure that we help taxpayers understand why their taxes are what they are. For example, when a local government gives a developer of anything, whether it's a new donut shop or an apartment complex or whatever, when they hand out a pilot, they're actually simply transferring tax burden to homeowners. That's what's happening. And that isn't something that we as a board can control, but it is something that we can message. And so, to your point earlier, Vic, it's really important how we craft the truth about this, and that we do craft it and we put it out properly.
We've been fortunate to have our community support our past capital projects. So our messaging, has to support this new project. And thanks to our community being so supportive, we've been able to, pass these projects.
And Don, to your point, I believe, and I could be wrong, but we as a board have the right to not move a pilot, even though Onondaga County may have done.
Well, I think we can go to the hearing and talk against the pilot, but we don't make the final decision. And I will tell you, a former business manager, I think Tiffany knows the story. There was a pilot applied for something over on 57, and it appeared they were gonna grant the pilot, and Jamie went to the hearing and explained to them that it wasn't the jobs it was creating. They were transferring jobs from one position to another position, and the pilot got refused. So they are, I think, more sensitive to it, but it's not, we don't make the final, of course. However, there is one of the other resolutions coming before New York City School Boards this year that Jeremy's gonna get through, is that they are asking that the pilots don't affect the calculations. So, which makes sense, that the pilot affects your taxes, but it doesn't need to necessarily impact the school board taxes. So Jeremy and Sam are gonna solve that for us in a couple of months, okay? One other thing I just do wanna point out is we've got option A, B, and C up there, but we could do something in between. We could, right now, we've already got 16 million in reserves. We could really be looking at 21 million, or we could be looking at 19 million or 18 million or something, and get, the overall percentages down a little bit. So it could be could be end up a percentage of, 2.7 or 2.8 or whatever.
And Tiffany, since our previous conversations related to that specific topic, we do have funds available in other reserves, and depending on working, we check this with both fiscal and our auditors. We do have the ability, the board has the ability, when they craft a resolution, to also write in there, Tiffany can correct me if I'm wrong, language like an additional revenue sources that are available that will allow us to then authorize the use of some of the other funding that we have in some reserves to offset. Because again, we have other reserves. We have more than $16 million available currently. So if the board wants us to go back after the conversation today and say, you know what, we want this somewhere in between A and B, we can do that work so that when you actually vote on this seeker and the next steps, you have that information so that that's what we go out and promote moving forward. I mean, my understanding is like 1.4, 1.7 million dollars could bring that down to like 2.8% estimated percent impact on the tax levy. And when you think about what we're earning currently on interest, last year alone, I believe it was close to $500,000 on interest with some of our reserve accounts in total, which is not a bad thing.
So it's not accounted for it.
Right.
Yes.
And that ultimately.
So Andrew just had a thought, just to try to see a consensus. Would you like to see the number below 3 there? Or what's any thoughts, any consensus?
I think I like round numbers, so I think if it was at or just under 3, that would be, I think, a better sell. You know, if you go to the store, everything's $1.99 or $2.99, and you say, well, oh wow, why not just round it up? And they did umpteen million market researchers, and that penny matters, because why would I spend $3 when I can spend it for less, even though it's a penny? So, I mean, I don't know if that would help, but I know for me, looking between option A and B, I look at the fiscal benefit of having a bigger reserve as a district that's gonna allow us to earn more interest, that's gonna allow us to have funds available in case of something catastrophic, or if all of a sudden we had to do something big now, we could. But, for me, personally, I think between A and B, it would be the, ideal goal of, if that's where the ball was gonna land, I would hope it would land someplace in between.
General agreement there, I see a lot of heads.
Yes.
Thank you.
And I think no matter which option we select, it starts out as a 10-cent difference, and I think if we're gonna emphasize that, it really, it doesn't matter,
So Neil, the only other thing I would need is just kind of we're good to continue moving forward, because there is a timeline, and ultimately our hope would be at this September meeting, there would be some resolutions that the board would have to act on in order to keep the ball moving forward so that we can start to plan for this vote.
You kind of looking for a little bit of consensus. If those September resolutions look anything like this, or better, I think we're pretty close to that.
So do we also need a resolution possibly in September on scenario A and B?
So I
Or would that
think,
not need to be done until after?
I think if we're saying we're going through with this project, I mean, what you see there is what you see, but I think A and B, if you're telling us that you wanna see something potentially in between.
No, I was talking about the reconfiguration.
Oh, yeah, so, yeah, basically, I mean, if you say you're okay with moving forward, they're all included within this, so we don't need to get into the details with, go back to B1 and B2, because that's gonna be really dependent on where we stand 3 years down the road with construction and where it makes the most sense. And the board will have that information at the time, pending successful voter approval. It gives us time to lay out all that information out. So I think you're basically, in saying that you're gonna move forward with this project, is you're committing to, you know, the vision that's listed within this document, which outlines the, again, 3 levels for the the upper elementary school, the intermediate school, 4, 5, 6, Derby being 7, 8, 9, Baker being 10 through 12, and the elementary schools being PK to 3, and the work that's associated with Project 3.
I think everybody's, I believe I'm seeing all nods, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, great, thank you.
So we will continue moving forward. We appreciate the support, and we'll do what we can now to start our campaign for getting this support from our community. Thank you, and thank you, Amanda.
Yes, thank you.
We have 2 more items on our discussion here. The first is being, is asked to provide the cell phone policy, currently where we stand. So I'm just gonna pull up the actual language in the code of conduct. And what I would like to highlight here, I know there's been a lot of information out there from our general, just out in the general public, from the governor's statements about, you know, potential statewide ban on electronic devices in school, cell phones specifically, because of the social media impact on students. And I know I've provided you with some information in Friday communications. I don't know that she will get there for the start of this school year. It sounds like, from my contacts, that, you know, over the course of the year, she may make a decision and enforce that like some other states. And if that is the case, then it would be, you know, implemented likely in the 2025-26 school year. But what I think is important to highlight here is that our policy currently that you've approved within our code of conduct provides us with flexibility to make decisions as building administrators and district administrators. And so we know right now at the elementary level and at the grade middle school, cell phones really aren't permitted to be out. And Derby has been conducting some parent forums, and in talking with TJ, they have a forum tomorrow night. It sounds like he's leaning in that direction as well. Now, when they think about penalties and consequences for students, it's not like you're going to get a detention. You know, there's a consequence that relates to the confiscation of the device and it gets returned to the parent, or something to that effect. Because part of the issue is we don't want to get into a power struggle with, you know, discipline, like detentions and in school and that type of thing. But the bottom line is, from what feedback he's getting, specifically for those students that are transitioning from Ray to the junior high school, is that, you know, that's where when kids are using those devices in school in unstructured settings, that's when we have issues. Issues with bullying, harassment, inappropriate use of those devices. So it sounds like he's got to get through this forum tomorrow, but, you know, the parent feedback's been positive. That's where they're going. And, you know, I'm happy going with the direction of saying we need to, you know, put an end to this in other buildings if there's the support for that. I don't want to be the front runner, but I think there's flexibility the way the current policy stands for buildings to make decisions.
To me, it makes sense, especially with the governor coming down, it looks like it's gonna be a full-on ban. There's a lot of research coming from other states that support that with performance of not only academics, but the students' social, emotional, behavioral skills. And I'm just gonna say, you brought it up, transitioning from Ray to Durkee, from a no cell phone environment to another grade level that is, would it make sense, being the current policy allows that building flexibility, and there's no actual discipline, like, would it make sense to transition to a more strict of no policy now, you know, as we believe the state's going there? You know, I feel like it'd be a lot easier on the students to come into a school year with it more frowned upon than having quote unquote some type of freedom removed suddenly, whether it be by our own or a state mandate. It seems like now we have an opportunity now to, especially if the parents and community supportive, to maybe approach it as it's headed that direction in a more strict manner, especially in those unstructured settings. It just, like, again, from my point of view, it makes sense that we kind of start there, but I'm just one guy.
Well, and I want to dovetail that a little bit, which is, one of the things that I noticed in here is we set some very good parameters, I think, and I like this kind of the way it is. One of the things I noticed is that in each situation, there's this recurring phrase that teachers or building administrators will have full discretion over the use of electronic devices within the classroom. And I'm wondering, so to your point, with that statement, there's a lot of wiggle room for different teachers have different personalities, right? Different ways that they use technology in their lesson planning, and you know, that whole gamut of why we say in some instances we might use and why in other instances we might not. I'm not sure if there's a way to do it, but what you've got me thinking is that is there a way to sort of describe or encourage some element of consistency from teacher to teacher, classroom to classroom, or situation to situation that might make things not necessarily standardized, but a little more predictable for kids, so that as changes come, they're kind of less shocking.
I think sometimes leading that way, the way you're describing as opposed to mandate, is more effective and more helpful. I think the further out you get from the reality of what's happening in context, mandates have so many unintended consequences, particularly on the state level. And I hope you all see me rolling my eyes. The people who are actually in the context of what's happening in a given moment have, I think, discretion is important. But at the same time, we all understand how insanely distracting these things are. We get it. But I would be leery the farther you pull out from a classroom and start mandating and taking discretion out of the hands of administrators and teachers, the more unintended there's no way people making these mandates can consider all the variables. It's just not possible.
And that's a good point. And that's why that is why the code of conduct is written the way that it is. And I know Don mentioned the fact that it says in the classroom, but if you slide to the second page, it also says that the building administrator and or classroom teachers has full discretion over the use of those devices in non-instructional settings as well. And that's where, again, this is the building and their TJ's building level leadership team and teachers making these recommendations and having the conversations with parents. And we purposely, with the code of conduct this year, when Dave was leading that committee, and then in my role, kind of stepped back because we need that buy-in. And yes, I more or less jokingly said I will enforce whatever we have to enforce it. That's the direction we're going. But I think the gradual approach is the most effective way, and I think that's what the building is really pushing for. When you think about other technology use, it doesn't mean that they're not going to be using software and things like that. They have Chromebooks, right? But they can do a lot of the work that we're asking them to do instructionally to meet 21st century skills without using a cell phone when you have those other devices. So,
Well, I would love to see it be the culture that we're encouraging them to not. Like, and maybe it will take a mandate. I'm not sure, but I think leading without the mandate would be helpful.
you're 100%.
Just the code of conduct, when we had the conversation during the code of conduct committee, one of the big pieces that came up was discussion about enforcement of it.
So you can create you can say we're gonna have a total ban, but then you're enforcing that piece of it, right? So I think in the end, kind of settling on having that discretion was a big piece of it because it allowed some flexibility and less focus on discipline for things that were minor infractions at times.
So David, with that said, we also have to be conscientious of the fact that our teachers have had their cell phones since 2020, since the pandemic.
Right.
So it's a code of conduct for all of us.
Yeah.
It's not just for the students.
And it's a good point. I made that comment in comment in agenda planning. You know, when I was the high school principal, that was when all of this was really coming to effect, right? The use of, you know, kids were carrying those devices and, you know, making a conscious effort to, you know, 'cause you have to have a work-related phone, and if my phone was ringing, it's I'm stepping into a unoccupied classroom or some other office space so that I'm not out flaunting the fact that I'm needing to use my device. Now that was, you know, well over 10 years ago now, but it's just interesting because I agree 100% that, you know, we have to model the expectation of what we think is appropriate for students.
Joe, how robust has the feedback from the community?
So TJ's had a relatively decent turnout. I mean, I'm interested to see what tomorrow brings. I mean, the rubber definitely hits the road when, you know, he communicates, here's what it's going to be. But from the PTA's perspective, from my conversations, and Dave or Renee, feel free to add, you know, again, I believe they're leading that way because of the positive feedback that he's received from his families.
So Tom and I attended the presentations for the Seal of Civic Readiness.
Yes.
Remember, and one of the presentations was about cell phone use, so help me out, I'm not sure I can remember all the details, but it seemed to me the students wanted to be trusted to make good decisions and wanted to learn to make good decisions. And it seems to me someplace in whatever we do, we ought to be teaching responsible cell phone use and transitioning students into having cell phones in an academic space, because I'm going to tell you, when they go to college, they're going to have their cell phones on their person every moment, and there isn't a college professor that's going to tell them, I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong, but generally college professors don't say, you know, put your phone away. If you don't want to pay attention and you get an F in the class, oh well, you know. So somehow we have to, you know, get students there as well.
Just as a reference, I tell them to put them on.
You do?
And they don't.
This is a tough area, but that's why I think we've been saying that unless there's that buy-in, I mean, we don't want to become the cell phone police and just creating these battles. But to your point, it's about teaching kids how to use them. And I think if they're not used to using them right now at Ray, and we slowly transition that at Durkee, you know, each year when they're up at Baker High School, it's going to look different. You know, 3 years, 4 years down the road. I mean, yes, the expectation would be that, you know, that yes, they have them, but they're not utilizing them because they've been taught what's appropriate and what's not in that setting. So whoever is on the Code of Conduct Committee for the board, I am sure no matter what happens this year, that there'll be another lively discussion when Dave pulls that committee together next year, or this year, for revisions for 25, 26.
So we did talk about this in agenda planning, and Carrie brought up something about a new app. And I just think it was fabulous knowledge. Would you talk about that?
Yeah, so we've talked about this before as well, right before the pandemic, and Danielle will remember we've done screenagers as through mental wellness. We've done, you know, some of those other cyberbullying, like different panel conversations. Jeremy actually facilitated a conversation with a panel for us at one point. But you know the biggest thing is, I think sometimes we sit here and think, we've done that, but then we forget that those students go on and now we have to do it again, right? So there's a whole new group of kids and the technology moves faster than we do. So, in elementary kids, I think that's the biggest shift over the last few years is elementary kids are now on phones, and one of the things that's come up is this Roblox game they're playing. They're actually in chat rooms, and so there can be predators. So there's a group, there's an app called Bark, some of you might be familiar with. They are promoting some educational stuff for parents, and we have a PTA parent who's actually a Durkee who's very enthusiastic about bringing that forward. She attended for herself. She's got them to sign on to come for free. I'm meeting with them next week. They'll be doing something through our PTA all about teaching parents, starting from elementary ages up, what's an appropriate boundary, what are some things you can do. There are settings about screen time you can set from your own phone. You can set an hour limit and then their phone shuts off. You can use Bark. You can do different things to sort of monitor them. And I think the goal and the point of those, from what I've seen, and I'll get more information when I meet with her, is about educating parents to have those conversations with your kids, because they are using phones and but those are also teachable moments. So how do you start that conversation and when? And that's what it's really all about. So I guess more to come on that.
Thank you.
I know our color conduct committee meets in the spring, but maybe our student representative would like to be a member. I mean, not to put you on the spot or anything, take for student input. You don't have to make your mind up right now.
Think about it.
Definitely in a touchy topic, but I think it's important to have the conversation. I forgot to mention too that we do have a community cafe scheduled in October with families to address this issue as well. So again, I'm putting it out there. That's where Derby's at, but then we'll see what feedback we get. I don't anticipate any major changes. Again, you've approved the code of conduct as is. There's that discretion, and we'll see where things go on the state's front, and then we as a school committee moving forward. The last item that we had listed under the discussion and presentations was just to give you a quick overview. I know I shared in the Friday letter, but for the community, our new website. This is scheduled to go live, if everything works out, on Wednesday. But what I wanted to highlight this evening for our community is just information. I think there's always confusion when you have assistant superintendents and directors and who does what, and who to contact for certain issues and concerns, or just where to go for information. Just wanted to highlight one of the pages, and it's consistent to what you see on our current website, but if I select the administrative team, there's an updated organizational chart for community, so they can see the breakdown of responsibilities for our assistant superintendents. So in Tiffany's case, assistant superintendent for management services, who she oversees within the organizational chart. Dave Kilgore, assistant superintendent for human resources. Renee, assistant superintendent for curriculum and instruction, and then Carrie, assistant superintendent for student services. And so when you think about just in general, and I'll show you more information here in a second, anything related to special education services, student support services, counseling, social workers, the instructional support team, the IST process that was mentioned earlier, that really falls within the realm of student services. And so that's Carrie's wheelhouse. When you think about curriculum instruction assessment, that's Renee's area, working with the directors that fall within her department. Human resources, anything personnel related, that would be with Dave, and then anything financial, business operations, and management, you'll see under Tiffany's area of focus. Specifically when it comes to business management, like chief operations officer, facilities. That's a joint, but because a lot of the work within that department falls within the personnel realm, we made that shift last year where Dave is really the immediate supervisor beyond the chief operations officer. Tiffany's there for the support, obviously, from the financial end. So that is available for our community. There's also the whom to contact list, which if we pull that up, it highlights, when there's a classroom issue, when there's a discipline issue, who you go to. You select first with the classroom teacher, and then if you're not satisfied there, then you go off to the building principal and then the directors. But within that, this site as well, you'll see major responsibilities for the leadership cabinet listed, as well as our instructional directors, and then the non-instructional administrators and supervisors. So I think, from the feedback that we have received, and we contact obviously in each of the buildings, but our site is scheduled to go live. Certainly ask questions. There's that link in a couple different places. Some other highlights Sarah wanted me to showcase with this new site. Go back to there'll be a news feature here, which will look different from some of the Parent Square highlights that we communicate. So all the Parent Square information will also be on the website. We've started this year a community group which allows grandma, grandpa, whoever wants to get our information when it goes out to be included. And so we blasted that out in the most recent Hive, and then we'll put it out again in school or Parent Square so that others can join. So I think that's an added feature to get the word out about the great things that are happening within the district. You'll see our countdown. And there's a lot of features with our back to school reference. There's a lot of drop downs. So if you have a question about the new website, you can click on this and more information, schedules and teacher assignments. So it's a lot more user friendly, and it's able to work on a smart device in a way that's easily accessible and it meets compliance with rules for accessibility.
So one of my pet peeves with the old one was that if I want to apply for a job in Baldwinsville, I had to click 3 or 4 places. I did one, then it took me to another, what is it like here?
What do you want to do?
Oh, it's just mine?
What do you want us to do, Mike?
Vic's gonna drive.
Board members can't work in the district. But on a serious note, there's been some updates. I mean, this is again a work in progress. There's a lot of behind the scenes. So what I would say is, when you click on human resources, it takes you to that page. There's links for, scroll down, I'm sorry. Various reporting. That is a feature here. They click right here for the recruit for job postings. They're listed there. They can select the actual job posting and be able to go right into that system. So a lot of these features, this is, again, all of this is a work in progress. So what Sarah has asked, as this becomes unveiled, I want to remind the community that if you see something that just doesn't seem right, please reach out to her and she will get that updated and corrected. And if the board has suggestions as we move forward, it's all about making the information more accessible to our school community.
Joe, I know there was a reason for this, but I actually see it there with Dave, that you do have his contact information. Is that available? Because I don't think it was on previous website.
So all of the cabinet level administrators, it is listed there.
What about teachers?
Teachers, it is not. Teachers, that's why we went to Parent Square, because they can email directly through that system. There's also a feature here under Contact Us, where it'll give the district phone number, support, but then there's a fillable form. So if somebody has a question or concern, they can type their information here, hit send. And the beauty with this is it allows the information to go to the district on that one way where we can then respond back, but it doesn't give out that identifiable information that places all over the world can access so that we get the spam. But for the most part, we're asking families to communicate through the parent square, which this is a byproduct of that. Smart Sites is affiliated. So you're gonna see a lot of the same features. Everything that's in Parent Square is gonna be, potentially posted here, either under the news feed or the Parent Square highlights on our site.
Are we able to access Parent Square?
Yes.
Yep.
And actually, that reminds me, you should have received my communication. You
Didn't go through.
Didn't go through, okay.
If I went to Parent Square, and tapped on it, it went through, but it didn't give me what it's gonna have.
On the email, okay, so we have to check some of your settings. We can work through that with your preferences. You should have received the communication that I sent about the, if you didn't, we can correct that.
I just wanted, so the reason that the individual teacher's contact information is not up there was that we were getting a number of phishing.
Yeah.
Problems, yeah.
Joe, if you scroll up right there,
Yep.
there's a quick link for employment too.
Yes.
Yep.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, that's what
If you were
Takes you right to it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you, Wendy. See, I should have had Sarah here going through all of this. She's the expert. I still haven't figured it out because it's not live.
Now, I just stumbled across it too, because is there any way to potentially make that a little bit smaller so that people will see that? Because it's the size of my screen too, but it kind of takes up all of it and you might not see it. But I think those shortcuts are pretty pertinent.
Yeah.
Or maybe put those above the picture.
Yeah, we can check. That's a good suggestion. We'll check with the vendor. And again, I will say it, if people have suggestions, please reach out to Sarah. She's happy to make adjustments. You'll notice consistency if you navigate to the school sites as well. It's got that same feel as the main site, but some of the headings up at the top are specific to each of the schools. There's the contact information. You'll notice here, it does list for administrators the email so that parents can contact that way. Again, what's relevant for them: athletics, fine arts, communications. And the beauty with this will be that the whole calendar will sync to what you see in Parent Square as well. So what you see on the website, if you actually pull up your cell phone and you look at the Parent Square app, the calendar feature that's in will be consistent. So our families have started to learn that feature as well.
I believe that, looks great.
Yeah, for sure.
So does that conclude our work session, I think, right?
That does.
Great job on the calendar also, too, Sarah.
Oh, I will absolutely share that with her.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, any other comments at this time, or we'll adjourn our August 19th work session and take a 5-minute recess, and then we have a short special meeting we need to conduct a little bit of business. So we declare us adjourned. Thank you.